It begins not with a scream, not with a gunshot, but with silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against the trees themselves, suffocating the forest that had held its breath for generations. In the far ridges of Appalachia, silence was never simple emptiness. It was suspicion, warning, and omen. Anyone who had lived through a mountain winter or a family feud knew well enough. When the woods quieted, danger was not far behind. The year was 1911, and the Appalachian Mountains were still a world apart from the rest of America. Trains already tunneled through valleys in West Virginia, mills churned in Pittsburgh, and automobiles began rattling over city bricks. But here, in the backwoods of eastern Kentucky, time stood almost still. Families traced their roots back a century, their cabins hunched beneath chestnut trees, dark as the soil they worked. Men swung pickaxes into coal seams and came home with faces stained black. Women stretched thin gardens of corn and beans into survival. Children walked barefoot until the frost lashed at their skin. This was a land of endurance. Poverty weighed heavily on every ridge. But beneath that poverty there was something darker still, woven into the hills like veins of ironstone: violence and mistrust. Breathitt County bore the mark most clearly. Outsiders called it Bloody Breathitt, and with good reason. For decades, feuds ripped through families like fire through dry timber. Fathers and sons were pulled into cycles of vengeance that made courts irrelevant and left churchyards crowded. A wrong word at a crossroads could spill blood faster than whiskey. In such a place, being different was its own form of danger. Unfamiliar surnames drew suspicion. Strange habits became whispered threats. Families who lived apart were always feared more than pitied. It was in this harsh soil that the tale of the Hollow Clan took root. They were not just poor, not simply reclusive, but marked by something the locals insisted was beyond natural misfortune. They lived in a hollow so narrow, so tightly brambled, that even by noon the light looked like dusk. Their cabin stood where the path petered out into shadows, its logs bleached gray, its windows shut tight as if afraid the daylight itself would intrude. Neighbors spoke of them in murmurs. Pale, that was the word most often used. Pale beyond the common pallor. Their skin bore no trace of the sun. Some swore their eyes shone under lantern flame. Others claimed they slipped through the woods only at night, their figures glimpsed against the ridge, silent, spectral, retreating at the first sign of contact. Children repeated these fears as dares. Step into the hollow after dark, call out their name, and see what answers. Some told stories of voices carried on the wind there, whispers in a tongue no one could place. Others said the clan kept to old ways, that they avoided the church, and that no hymn ever escaped their cabin walls. But the most unsettling truth was this: they were no legend. Facts survived in the brittle ink of census ledgers. Families named, tallies marked. Hollow Clan present, though always annotated with unease. Words scrawled in margins, unfit. Odd appearance. Reports unspoken. It was enough to prove they were flesh and blood, but peculiar enough that officials eventually stopped writing more. Even history seemed reluctant to document them fully. A farmer from a nearby ridge once admitted he had seen one of them crossing pasture land under starlight. The figure halted when it realized it was watched. It did not run. It simply turned, and in uncanny stillness, walked back into the tree-line without a word. Another man told of encountering two hollow men at a trading post in the blackest hours of night. They spoke little, and when they did, their voices carried an odd cadence, almost like an imitation, as if they knew the words of the place, but not the rhythm of its people. The Hollow Clan were living neighbors, and yet they seemed set apart from the living. And like all things that could not be explained, their existence soon tangled with ideas of curses, of punishment dealt by God, of shadows bred into families who dwelled too far beyond the reach of daylight. By the summer of 1911, the murmurs grew strong enough that the state intervened. Not through a sheriff nor circuit preacher, but a physician. Dr. Jonathan Kersey was his name. Trained in Louisville, 38 years old, deliberate, practical. The State Board of Health dispatched him into Kentucky's remote corners to study outbreaks of disease, to document poverty and its physical toll. Hunger, parasites, pellagra, infections. These were the shadows he was meant to confront. He believed in reason, science, medicine. He carried not a Bible, but a leather satchel filled with stethoscope, thermometer, pen, and ledger. And yet Dr. Kersey carried with him more than duty. He had read letters, whispered accounts sent by ministers and by weary census-takers. Letters that hinted not just at illness, but at peculiar conditions unfit for written record. They mentioned a family unseen in daylight, whose skin bore no color, whose reclusive ways strayed beyond poverty into ritual. Such suggestions would not be published in medical journals, but in whispers they spread, even to the desks of men who sought facts alone. So Kersey set out in July heat, taking a mule path into Breathitt County. He recorded, in notes lost to history but later whispered by descendants, what he noticed as he walked. The forest thickened in unnatural ways. Birds grew scarce deeper in the hollow. The air itself hung stubborn, almost metallic, as though the place rejected intruders. The pathway grew narrow until roots snagged at his boots and branches scraped his sleeves like veiled warnings. The first glimpse of the Hollow Clan's homestead came sudden. A clearing starved of grass, swallowed in shadow, and upon its edge a cabin slouched against the trees, its timbers damp and worn. No smoke coiled from its chimney. No tools lay against its walls. It seemed less inhabited than abandoned. And yet there was movement, a shutter cracked, then sealed, as though an unseen gaze had already marked the doctor's presence. Kersey paused. A man trained in science, yes, but not immune to unease. Something was wrong about the silence here. It was too complete, as though time itself stalled at the threshold of the Hollow Clan's land. And in that silence, the macabre question began to unfold. Who were these people, hidden even from the law of their own county, cursed, as the locals murmured, or carriers of something darker than even feud blood could account for? The doctor stepped forward. His footfall broke the pause, yet not the tension. The story of the Hollow Clan, all its whispered edges and dreadful weight, was waiting for him inside those walls. Because some families shield their secrets to the grave. But the Hollow Clan secret, in 1911, was ready to be unearthed. And this is where it begins. Dr. Jonathan Kersey stood before the clearing, boots damp from the dew that clung thick on every blade of grass, and for a moment he wondered if he had trespassed into a place deliberately sealed from the world. The Hollow Clan's cabin was no grand fortress, yet it projected a weight that held him still, as if the building itself were watching him. Its walls sagged inward, logs silvered by years of weather, patched in places by uneven planks. But what struck him most was its silence. Cabins, even in the poorest corners of Appalachia, usually spoke with sound. The rhythm of a saw against wood, a rooster cutting dawn, a child's quick cry, a pot rattling over coals. This cabin, crouched in shadow, whispered none of it. There was no livestock, no hoe leaning against a frame, no evidence of chores half done or daily life paused. Only shutters, tightly drawn. Only doors, locked against intrusion. And yet the feeling of being observed pressed against him like the fog. He knew there were eyes behind those slats. Watching, waiting. Kersey cleared his throat, not because he felt the need, but because silence begged to be broken. "My name is Dr. Jonathan Kersey," he called, his accent carrying the clipped firmness of schooling from Louisville. "I was sent by the state. I come regarding reports of illness. I mean no harm." His words carried across the clearing, yet for a long moment there was no reply, only the faint rustle of branches creaking together above. Then, soft, almost uncertain, the door opened a fraction. A figure lingered behind it. Male, lean in outline, his face cast in shade. But what struck Kersey, even from across the distance, was the pallor. Skin so light it seemed to catch what little light filtered down. The man did not step outside fully. He remained half-hidden, as though crossing the threshold were dangerous. "What is it you want?" the voice asked. The tone was cautious, almost slow, as though each word had been weighed before release. "I'm a physician," Kersey said again. "I've been sent to examine the health of families in this area. Some reports reached our office, unusual reports. I came to see if there is truth to them, if aid is needed." The door stayed half open. The man behind it said nothing. But within the shadows, Kersey felt multiple pairs of eyes. Shapes shifted behind him. Children, perhaps. Or more grown kin, silent and watchful. Finally, the figure spoke. "We don't need nothing from the outside." The words carried something heavier than refusal. They held defiance. And yet something behind the voice trembled, faint but present, betraying unease rather than hostility. Kersey adjusted his stance, speaking evenly. "I understand distrust, but my orders stand. I will not force myself where I am unwanted, but I must at least ask, have you known illness here? Strange weakness? Fever? Anything your neighbor families have not?" For a span, no answer. Then, quietly, another voice inside the house, softer, higher, unmistakably female. "Let him look, Joseph." The man at the door shifted. His outline stiffened, almost reluctant. But finally, with a low creak, he pulled the door wider. "One moment only. Then you go." Kersey lifted his satchel and crossed the clearing, boots crunching faint roots beneath. As he approached the threshold, he smelled it. The scent of damp would seep into clothes, and beneath it something metallic, faintly acrid. A trace of sickness he could not name. Inside, his eyes adjusted slowly. The cabin's interior was dim despite daylight outside. Shutters nailed tight blocked nearly all sun, and what little glow came through filtered blue-gray. The room was sparse, a crude table, 2 benches, a bank of shelves holding cracked jars and threadbare cloth. Against one wall, a fire grumbled low, but no smoke curled up through a chimney, only through narrow gaps between logs. And there they were, the hollow clan. 6 figures total, as far as he could quickly mark. 3 adults, the man Joseph, tall and severe, a woman with sunken cheeks and tired eyes, and an older matriarch whose back arched like a bow yet whose gaze remained sharp. Alongside them, children, clustered near like shadows bound to the corners. The rumors had not misled. Their faces bore pale skin almost translucent, veins faintly visible beneath. Their lips held little color. Their hair, though dark, seemed to contrast harshly against skin untouched by sun. And their eyes not glowing, not inhuman, but unervingly reflective, catching the dim firelight like polished stone. Kersey felt the weight of what the neighbors whispered. These were not spirits, not monsters, yet their rarity of complexion, their hidden dwelling, made them seem almost otherworldly. But a physician's mind does not yield to superstition. He steadied himself. "You live far from neighbors," Kersey began calmly, resting his satchel down. "My task is to ensure no sickness festers unheeded here. Perhaps I could examine the children, or at least hear your complaints, if any afflictions weigh upon you." The matriarch's voice cut sharp through the air. "No one outside need know our affairs. We live. We work. We owe nothing." The firmness held finality. But the woman beside her, younger, likely the mother, lifted one hand. Thin, trembling fingers. She spoke so low Kersey had to strain. "There has been," her voice faltered. She glanced at Joseph, who stared hard, warning in his eyes. But still she finished. "Weakness." Kersey seized gently upon the word. What sort of weakness? Her lips pressed tight, her gaze dropping. And in that quiet, Kersey realized the truth. Their secrecy was not born merely of reclusion, but of fear. Fear of what others might think, of what others might do if they knew. Joseph stepped forward then, placing himself between Kersey and the rest. "One moment," you said. "That moment's done. Leave." For the first time, real tension rippled. His height loomed, his jaw clenched. Behind him, a child coughed, dry, thin, hollow. Kersey's ears latched to it. In that sound alone was proof enough. But Joseph barred him from seeking further. The doctor knew he could not argue here, not yet. To press too hard might close the door forever. So he gathered his satchel, nodded slowly, and stepped back into the clearing. "Very well," he said evenly. "But I will return. If you change your mind, call upon me." The door shut behind him, wooden and final. Yet the cough lingered in his ears as he made his way back along the path. The Hollow Clan was no myth. They were real, and they were hiding something deeper than mere fear of the sun. And Kersey, though dismissed, had glimpsed just enough to know this mystery would not release him now. When Jonathan Kersey left the Hollow Clan's land, the silence of their clearing followed him like a shadow he could not shake loose. The narrow path back down the ridge seemed longer than its climb upward, each turn of earth echoing the faint cough that had slipped like an unguarded secret from behind their shuttered walls. He told himself he had accomplished something. A first glimpse, confirmation that this family was flesh, not legend. And yet, deep within, he carried the knowledge that their sickness, whatever it was, would not remain bound by secrecy forever. Back at the roads more trodden, Kersey tethered his mule and adjusted his notebook. A physician was expected to observe not only the body, but the social air that might breed disease. And in Breathitt County, suspicion itself was often as virulent as fever. The first home he visited beyond the hollow lay perched near a creek bed, smoke curling from its rock chimney, 2 hounds bristling with suspicion at his approach. The farmer, Elias Turner, greeted him with narrowed eyes. In these parts, no man greeted strangers warmly without reason, and the presence of paper and pen in Kersey's hand made him doubly suspect. "You came from up yonder," Turner said flatly, nodding toward the ridge. "Don't waste your time with that lot." Kersey steadied his tone. "What do you know of them? What does any man need to know?" Elias spat tobacco into the dust. "They're not like us. Blood's wrong. Mark my word, there's no cure for what they got. Best leave them hid where they are, for the safety of good folk." "And yet they live among you," Kersey pressed. "You've seen them?" Turner's jaw set tight. "Seen enough. They come down at night, never day. By meal, lamp oil, keep to themselves. Never heard one raise their voice. But a curse don't always shout, doctor. Sometimes it whispers. Folks that live in shadow, they carry shadow." It was not evidence, but conviction, the kind of mountain judgment weightier than proof. Kersey jotted notes, regardless. Perceived curse, suspicion rooted in fear. He moved on. At another homestead, he was met by a woman hanging laundry, arms thin but strong from labor. Mary Combs spoke with more caution, less venom, but her tale blurred no kindness either. "As a girl," she said while wringing cloth, "I saw one standing at the creek. Thought she was hurt, so pale she was. I called out, asked if she needed water. She looked at me, but didn't answer. Her lips moved, but I heard nothing. Then she turned, walked off without a sound. The cold stayed in me 2 days after." Kersey pressed gently. "And do you believe them dangerous?" Her hands paused over the basin. "Not dangerous like men with guns are dangerous, but different enough that maybe it draws danger sure, as bait draws flies. Folks don't take kindly to different, doctor. You'd best remember it." Her words cut sharper than she perhaps meant. Folks don't take kindly to different. In this county, where feuds tore kin apart, what chance had a family already marked strange by blood and habit? One by one, the doctor visited farms that lay along the winding ridges and valleys. Each time, the details differed, but the sentiment was constant. Too pale, too nocturnal, too silent. They were tolerated at best, avoided at worst. Not once did anyone admit to speaking more than a handful of words to them. They were ghosts in flesh, acknowledged yet excluded from the community's fragile weave. That night, Kersey retired to a lodging house in Jackson, the county seat. From his window, he saw lanterns flicker along the Kentucky River, heard fiddle music crackle from a porch, laughter spilling through an evening softened by bourbon. Life here, though hard, bore the stamp of kinship and shared struggle. And yet he thought of the Hollow Clan in their shuttered home, estranged and voiceless among their own county. He wrote in his ledger, "Social exile complete. Physical pallor extreme. Child's cough suggests potential hereditary affliction or endemic disease. Neighbors interpret as curse. Possible violence if prejudice swells. Further contact essential." But as the hours deepened and the music faded, he found himself staring at the single line longer than all others. Possible violence if prejudice swells. For in Appalachia, violence did not need much provocation. The following morning, before returning toward the hollow, Kersey sought one more source of testimony. The county clerk, Samuel Hargis, a man known equally for his meticulous records and his sharp temper. Within the courthouse, Hargis drew file after file from the decaying shelves, placing before Kersey fragments of the Hollow clan's documented existence. Census records noted names: Joseph, Hannah, Old Mariah, scratched in spidery ink but devoid of detail. Margins often carried annotations: peculiar, avoidant, appears infirm. A bill of sale from the trading store listed late-night purchases: flour, salt, oil, never livestock, never fabric. A single court report marked 1897 revealed a complaint: trespass by hollow kin, later dismissed without trial. Hargis tapped the papers with ink-stained fingers. They've been here longer than you think. Old Mariah, I recall, is said to be pushing 70 now. Nobody really knows. They don't marry outside. They don't bury outside neither. Grounds kept on their land. Kersey leaned forward. So their bloodline is closed? Aye, closed tight as a coffin. Hargis eyed him with a thin smile. And we all know what happens when blood don't breathe fresh. God sets his curses where man sets his walls. Yet what the clerk called a curse, Kersey heard as the echo of heredity, of illnesses bred into families isolated by fear and pride. Where others saw damnation, he saw the dark hand of biology. And yet, even as science steadied him, unease clawed in his ribs. He folded the papers, thanked Hargis, and stepped back onto dusty streets. The sun burned high, but his hands felt cold. In the days ahead, Kersey would seek another meeting with the Hollow clan, determined to examine their condition directly. But between one cough in the shadows and one too many whispers among the neighbors, he now knew their time in secrecy was running thin. For in Breathitt County, when fear fermented too long, it demanded resolution. And rarely did resolution come without blood. The second time Jonathan Kersey took the mule path into the Hollow, the air felt heavier, as if the land itself remembered his first intrusion. The forest grew dense quicker here, thickets closing like a throat around stone. Even the mule resisted, stamping stubborn until Kersey dismounted and led it by reins. No bird sang. No creek nearby broke silence. The Hollow seemed to choke off sound before it reached its heart. At the clearing, the cabin loomed the same, sun denied, shutters tight, smoke absent. Yet when Kersey stepped forward, he saw movement more plainly this time. The curtain flickered, a child's outline darted from window to wall. They were expecting him. And when the door opened again, Joseph stood framed in the gap, his pale face taking on the sharp cast of suspicion. His jaw clenched, his arms crossed. You were told to leave. Kersey remained steady. I did leave. I gave you space. But I also heard a cough among your children. Weakness can claim young ones quickly. If not me, then who will tend to them? Behind Joseph, old Mariah's rasping voice carried. Let him. God knows the boy ain't mended by our hiding. Kersey caught the flicker in Joseph's eyes. Resistance grinding against something deeper. Fear. After a long stillness, Joseph stepped back, grudgingly. Quick, then. The doctor entered once more, and for the first time knelt near the clan's children. There were 3 of them, thin-legged, solemn-eyed. Their skin bore the same pallor as their parents', lips faint, hair draped dark and limp. The eldest boy, perhaps 8, clutched his side when he coughed, a dry, brittle sound like bark snapping. Kersey guided him gently to sit, setting his stethoscope against the ribs. The boy's heartbeat was thin but constant. His chest rattled faintly, breath shallow. Does he tire easily? Kersey asked. The mother, Hannah, nodded quickly, her voice faint. Always. Even fetching kindling, he sits down after. The physician pressed further. The child's pulse quickened irregularly, not fever, not infection, but something deeper, harder to name. He recalled manuscripts from his schooling, discussions of congenital afflictions, passed down in blood where kin married too close. Cases rare, but recorded. Seizures in Tennessee children. Blue-tinged lips among coal camps. Weak, wan bodies that would not thrive under work or sun. He turned his eye toward the younger girl. She, too, showed faint veins tracing blue beneath translucent skin. She twitched away from his touch at first, but whispered nothing. Eyes locked on his hands, suspicious, afraid. Kersey breathed inward. Here was the truth behind the whispers. Not curse, but lineage. Disease seeded by seclusion. Where others saw omen, he saw the cost of generations bound tight behind shuttered walls. And yet there was something else. Not illness alone. A choice. A willful closing off. He turned to Joseph and Hannah. Your children may live, but their health will not improve without light, food, medicine. Keeping them shut away cannot save them. At once Joseph's hand tightened, closing his fist. We protect our own. Outside don't offer salvation. Outside offers ruin. Old Mariah leaned forward, voice sharp yet trembling with age. Ruin already lingers here. What harm can light do where darkness already claims? The words cracked against Joseph's anger. For a moment, Kersey thought violence would break loose between them. But silence slashed across the cabin instead. The doctor pressed carefully. You fear outsiders. Why? Has harm been done to you before? Joseph's nostrils flared. He did not answer. But Hannah's eyes, heavy with something rarely shared, flicked toward the physician. Women don't forget, doctor. Not what was said. Not what was done. No further words followed, but their weight remained. Kersey marked it down the moment he returned outside. Past conflict? Persecution? Reason for withdrawal? Yet each line raised more questions than it answered. He left the hollow with the impression of secrets stacked heavier than illness itself. Behind their shutters, the family hid not just frailty of the body, but old wounds of memory, things the neighbors either never knew or refused to speak. Still, progress had been made. He had laid stethoscope to their children's hearts, pen to the faint rattle in their lungs. Science whispered explanation where others saw curse. But truth is never enough to erase fear. In these hills, truth often strangled, drowned beneath the louder voice of superstition. By the time Kersey reached Jackson again, dusk bled down the ridges. Lanterns flickered in porches. Conversations hummed low from men leaning against posts. As he tethered his mule, one voice rose from a corner bench, cracking across the air. Heard you was fool enough to step inside their place. 3 men sat there, miners still spotted with black dust across their clothes. Whiskey burned in their breath, suspicion sharper still. Kersey did not answer at first, steadying himself. The tallest of them leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Can't cure what's God's curse, doctor. You best leave that hollow be. Or what? Kersey asked evenly. Or you'll find their shadow don't stay where it belongs. You invite it by meddling. You carry it back. The men's gazes fixed on him long before he answered. Discipline carried him away before their threat grew teeth, but the words nested in his chest nonetheless. For in his short time here, Kersey began to see the trap tightening. A clan bound by sickness and secrecy, neighbors bound by prejudice, and himself bound by duty he could not abandon. And somewhere between those bindings, a match waited. One spark, to fan suspicion into violence. That night, alone at his desk, he set pen to paper. The hollow clan conceal hereditary affliction. Children present weakness, likely transfer through bloodline. Isolation worsens condition. Neighbor fear profound. Risk of escalation high. Next step, further medical confirmation. Must test blood, observe diet. Only then can I argue truth against superstition. But as he folded the page, another cough echoed in memory, drier, fainter than before. The boy's eyes haunted him, and with it, a darker thought gnawed at his resolve. Even if truth could be proven, could truth ever save them in Kentucky's cursed-breathed hollow? Jonathan Kersey rose before dawn restless, his mind caught between two worlds, the logic of science that guided every step of his career, and the tide of superstition threatening to drag all reason beneath it. He had tasted enough of both to know that truth alone would not protect the hollow clan. To neighbors, their existence was already a curse in human form. And curses, in these hills, were not tolerated for long. His satchel lay ready on the table. Inside were instruments of precision, thermometer, stethoscope, syringes, notebooks, fragile weapons against the crushing tide of ignorance. That morning he resolved not merely to glimpse the hollow clan, but to study them properly, to record evidence concrete enough to stand even against fear. The journey back into the hollow was damp, mist clinging to the narrow path like breath against glass. He paused once when a crow startled from the trees, wings slapping the air with violent protest. Silence afterward felt near absolute. Each visit here pressed deeper into unease, but Kersey's resolve carried him forward. The cabin again rose from the shadows, and this time Hannah stood waiting on the porch, pale, shawl drawn tight despite the July heat. She regarded him not with warmth, but not with rejection either. Instead, with weary resignation. "You'll not bring talk of ours outside?" she asked softly. "Not talk. Only truth," he replied. "I am a physician. I keep records, not gossip." After a pause long enough that he thought she might turn him away, she opened the door. For the first time, he entered not as intruder, but as guest. Inside, the same gloom prevailed. Curtains nailed across windows, fire smoldering in a hearth more ash than flame. The children gathered close, wary but curious. Joseph lingered at the far wall, arms crossed, gaze fixed sharply. Old Maria muttered by the table, her voice rasping hymns without melody. As Kersey opened his satchel, the children's eyes widened. The gleam of metal instruments was not something their world often saw. He began gently, showing each piece, explaining in words simple enough not to frighten. The eldest boy, Samuel, allowed Kersey to take his wrist, feel his pulse, press the stethoscope again to his chest. The same weakness sang through him. Shallow breath, thin heartbeat, lungs almost clear of sound yet threaded with fragility. Not infection, no fever. Pure frailty. The kind born into marrow itself. The younger girl, Ruth, bore signs more subtle. Her gums pale where others would flush. Her energy fleeting. Her limbs thin as reeds. They were not dying yet, but they were not thriving. Starvation of blood, perhaps. Something that could not be undone by soup or prayer. Kersey explained what he could. He spoke of the body's need for fresh air, for hearty food, for time in the sun. But at the word sun, Joseph's eyes hardened like stone. "No sun," he said curtly. "Not for ours." "But sunlight strengthens," Kersey replied carefully. "It gives what no lamp can. Without it, illness will only deepen." Joseph moved closer, towering. What sun gave us was scorn, burnt eyes, jeers, beatings. You'd see us killed quicker than cured if we walked among them again. Hannah lowered her gaze, and old Mariah's muttering sharpened. Best the Lord keep us low, and hidden than exposed for cruel eyes. Kersey said no more. He knew reason could not pierce wounds older than his arrival. Yet as he drew a small sample of blood with his syringe, sealing it in vial, he steadied his promise inwardly. He would not abandon them to shadows without effort. He would study. He would record. He would fight ignorance with proof. But outside, beyond those shuttered walls, proof was already losing before the battle had begun. At the trading post in town, voices turned sharper when Kersey's name passed lips. Whispers spread of his visits. How often he had been seen riding toward the ridge. How long he lingered there. Whiskey-fueled talk turned suspicion into story, story into threat. He lays hands on them as if they're fit to heal, one miner spat. Touching what ain't meant to be touched. Who knows what he carries back among us? "Mark my word," another growled. "If the sickness spreads in these parts, we'll know who to blame." The venom grew so loud that by the third retelling, Kersey was no longer healer, but accomplice, colluding, perhaps consorting, with the Hollow clan's curse. One evening, while Kersey returned from a circuit of homes, a farmer named Elias Turner stopped him on the path, rifle perched casual across his arm. "You've been going there too often, doctor," he said, tone neither friendly nor neutral. "Folks think you catch what they carry. Maybe you spread it." Kersey met his hard stare. "I treat illness. I do not spread it." Turner spit tobacco dark against the soil, careful that others believe the same. "Bloods run easy, round here for less." The warning echoed long after Turner walked off. Kersey noted it in his ledger, underlined twice. Growing hostility. Risk of violence imminent. Back inside the hollow that week, Kersey continued examinations. He charted weights, pulses, breathing rhythms. He noted that none bore swelling or fever, no consumption, no cholera, nothing of infection. What lay within them ran deeper, a hereditary condition, strengthened by blood too close, worsened by seclusion. At moments, Hannah spoke openly. They call us cursed. They never knew. They only hate. Better to hide than feed their fire. At other times, Joseph grew restless, muttering to himself, stepping outside to pace like a caged man. His fear was not of sickness, but of intrusion, of what men might do if they fully knew. And though Kersey remained calm, his growing knowledge pressed against the same conclusion. This family could not survive forever like this. The boy's cough worsened daily, and, outside, whispers turned to threats. The walls of the Hollow clan closed tighter, and the circle of neighbor suspicion tightened too. The night Kersey set down his pen, the storm he feared cracked the horizon. A shot fired wild in the distance, echoing through the ridges. Not aimed at him, nor at the Hollow, but loud enough to send a message. Appalachia had never needed much reason to spill blood. For the Hollow clan, it seemed reason was now being sharpened. The shot that cracked across the ridges didn't wound anyone that night, but it wounded the air itself. Jonathan Kersey woke to the sound still gnawing in his ears. The echo ricocheting through his chest long after silence reclaimed the land. In Appalachia, thunder and rifles were cousins. One came with rain, the other with vengeance. He feared it was only a matter of time before the storm changed from skyborn to bloodborne. 2 days later, proof came in whispers sharp as blades at the courthouse in Jackson. Miners and farmers alike gathered on the steps, their talk no longer about feuds or wages, but about the Hollow people, and the stranger who walked among them. They ain't right, one voice rang coarse with bourbon. Kersey knows it. Hell, maybe he helps them keep their ways. Another spat in dust. If sickness comes, he's to blame. Cough's already heavy in the valley. My girl wheezed last night. Your girl wheezed cause of dust and damp, not curses, someone retorted. But the defense carried little weight. Fear never needed science for fuel. By the time Kersey arrived with his ledger under arm, the group's eyes cut toward him as if he'd walked wearing a brand of guilt. You still tend into them, doctor? The tallest man asked, stepping forward, lips curled in near sneer. I treat the sick where I find them, Kersey answered steadily, just as I would treat yours. You'd best remember whose side you're on, another growled. Ain't no salvation meddling with cursed blood. Their mutters thickened into something like agreement, a low hum of resentment that matched thunderclouds brewing above. Kersey passed through with stiff spine, but inside he felt a tremor. Breathitt County had seen more lynchings than trials, and mobs here were quick to carve justice with steel. That evening he retreated to the Hollow again, compelled less by duty now than by fear that absence would cost the clan dearly. Hannah met him at the threshold, worry etched heavy into her pale face. They talk, she said almost before greeting. Children hear it in whispers at the well. They say fire might come, that men plan to drive us out before harvest. Kersey set down his satchel, heart pounding. Then hiding will no longer protect you. You must let me write to the state. Bring officials protection. Joseph appeared from shadows, expression carved like stone. Officials. His voice rose sharp. The same that branded us unfit, that scrawled curses in their ledgers? You'd hand us over to them, too. I'd hand you over to medicine, not superstition, Kersey urged. If I can prove the nature of your condition, there's chance. There's no proof that breaks 8, Joseph cut back. You don't know this place. You'll leave when they turn on you. We'll remain. We always have. For the first time, Kersey's composure cracked. And what then, Joseph? You think your children will survive this? I've heard their lungs. I've seen the blood. Whatever curse you defy outside, another curse runs in your very veins. You can't lock both away forever. The words struck like forks of lightning. Silence followed, raw, bitter silence that tasted heavier than thunderclouds outside. Hannah turned aside, tears stifled against her sleeve. Old Mariah muttered, voice cracked, best he knows. Best truth spill now than later. Kersey stepped back, guilt settling over him even as reason flared. He had spoken hard, but truth often cut sharp before it mended. That night, as rain lashed the hollow roof and the mountains groaned under stormwind, the family let him stay longer. He examined Ruth's gums again, Samuel's frail ribcage, marking each symptom meticulously. His conclusion tightened. Hereditary anemia, aggravated by kin marriages, worsened by lack of sun and fresh food. Science gave it name, though names alone could not shield from fire. By the ember's glow, Hannah whispered when Joseph finally stepped out. "We never asked for this. My children, they know nothing of the hate. They only know the dark. If men come, promise, you'll not let them burn our children." The plea shattered him. In that moment, Kersey realized he was no longer simple physician. He had become their reluctant shield. Around their frail forms he felt the brewing mob gathering beyond the trees, sharpening fear into torches. And indeed, outside the hollow, whispers became plans. In taverns, in porches, in hushed gatherings after supper, men decided what ought to be done. "Best to drive them out," said one. "Best to burn 'em down, curse and all," answered another. "Ain't safe elsewise." By week's turn, Kersey sensed the pace of time itself shortening. Each cough in the hollow was louder, each murmur in town harsher. The two worlds hurtled headlong toward collision. Back in his lodging, pen scratching furiously, Kersey wrote to Louisville, urgent pleas for supplies, for intervention, for recognition that what he had found was disease, not demonry. But no reply would reach in time. Letters rode mules, and trains too slow for mobs hungry to act. On his desk lay one vial of hollow clan blood, faintly darkened against the glass. Proof, fragile and scientific, of what their neighbors called damnation. He held it up to lamplight, veins of crimson running like tiny rivers. Proof that their secret was no curse, merely human, terribly human. But would proof ever contend with fire? On the last page of his ledger, he wrote 5 words in a hand that trembled. "The storm is nearly here." And in the hollow, children lay restless while winds clawed against the shutters, as though the mountains themselves knew men were stirring to violence. The night the mob came, summer heat had not yet broken. The air lay thick, restless, as if the mountains themselves held their breath. In Jackson, whiskey emptied quicker than usual at the tavern. Words sharpened faster than knives. Old suspicions had fermented too long, and now rage spilled uncontrolled, taking form in men with rifles slung on their shoulders and torches clenched in their fists. By late dusk, whispers became a march. Feet pressed the dusty road in rhythm. Wagon creaked under oil-soaked rags, and voices rose with a single unarguable call. "Drive them out." Jonathan Kersey had been at his desk when he heard the tramp of boots outside his lodging. He rushed to the window and saw them. A dozen at least, perhaps more, faces lit harsh by flame, their shouts carrying the blunt certainty of a verdict already fixed. All eyes turned not toward the courthouse nor the mines, but toward the shadowed ridge where the hollow clan lay hidden. Kersey's heart clenched. He had no rifle, no authority, only his satchel, his ledger, and the fragile vials of blood that bore proof of truth too delicate for such a night. Yet he could not sit by. He bolted into the street, shouting, "Stop! You don't know what you're doing." But men drunk on fear do not hear reason. They pushed past him, sneers curling. One spat near his boots. "Step aside, doctor. You put your faith in them. You burn with them." The warning struck like cold iron. No words would cleave through their fury. And so Kersey did the only thing left. He mounted his mule and rode hard into the mountains, hoping to reach the hollow before flame did. The path was cruel under haste. Branches tore at sleeves, rocks kicked loose beneath hooves, sweat stung his eyes. But the thought of pale children waking to fire spurred speed beyond sense. By the time the cabin clearing opened before him, night thickened overhead, stars pale against the pitch. Inside, the hollow clan stirred. Joseph stood rigid by the doorway, axe in hand, having heard the march long before Kersey arrived. Hannah clutched Ruth tightly, her breath sharp with panic. Old Mariah muttered, voice broken, prayers unsalvageable. Samuel coughed hard, his frame trembling under the strain. "They're coming," Kersey gasped, sliding down from the saddle. You must leave. Now. No, Joseph snarled. This is ours. Land, timber, blood. We leave, what are we? Nothing. And nothing will not be. You'll be dead. Kersey shouted back. This is not defense, it is suicide. Think of your children. But Joseph's eyes were wild, hollow with years of defiance. Better to burn in our walls than crawl on theirs. Already, the glow of torches licked against the tree lean beyond. Voices swelling, boots trampling in approach. Kersey turned to Hannah, her eyes wet with desperate fear. Go, he urged. Take the children through the backwoods. Follow the ridge to the river. I'll hold them. I'll stall. Hannah hesitated, torn between husband and survival. Thunder of voices grew louder, closer. And then Joseph shouted, not at her, but at all. Let them come. Axe raised high, face pale with grim determination. The mob reached the clearing like floodwater. Torches flared. Rifles leveled. Curses spat sharp into the night. Men surrounded the cabin, voices blending into a chant of damnation. Burn M. Cursed all of M. They don't belong. Kersey stepped forward, arms raised, voice breaking raw. They are not cursed. They are sick. I am a doctor. I've seen their blood. This is no demonry. This is disease. But his plea scattered against the roar. Fire is never quenched by truth when fear feeds it. One man hurled a torch against the wall. Dry wood caught with an ugly hiss. Flame spread quick across resin-packed logs, devouring shadows in orange hunger. Screams erupted inside, children wailing against smoke already thickening. Kersey pushed forward, shoving past shoulders, knocking torches aside with his bare hands. Heat tore his skin, but he forced through, reaching the door where Joseph stood silhouetted against fire glare. Axe still gripped high. Let them out. Kersey cried. They will die. For a moment, axe and Will held steady. But Hannah's scream tore through. Ruth clung to her waist. Samuel collapsed, coughing, against her shoulder. And Joseph faltered. For all his defiance, the sight of his children bent his knees. He dropped the axe with a choked growl. Together, Kersey and Hannah dragged the children out into the clearing, smoke trailing after. The mob fell back a step, startled by their frailty. Not demons, not devils, but fragile, gasping children. Yet even pity does not pierce deep when hatred blinds. Another shout rose. Don't let 'em spread it. Fire's the only cure. The crowd surged anew. Kersey spread himself between torch and family, chest heaving, voice searing from his throat. I will not let you kill them. They are yours as much as mine. Same flesh, same blood. Look at them. Your fear blinds you to their humanity. Torches wavered. Not all hands held steady. Some eyes softened, others hardened. One man lowered his rifle, uneasy. Another growled for fire again. The clearing hung in balance, between mercy and massacre, between ignorance and understanding. And in that fragile breath, fire devoured more of the cabin behind, roof caving with a deafening crash. Sparks shot skyward like curses carried on smoke. The Hollow clan's home was gone. Whether lives went with it depended on moments stretched unbearably thin. And Jonathan Kersey, bloodied by smoke and ash, braced himself for what might follow when a mountain mob decided fate in firelight. The cabin collapsed in on itself, timbers snapping like brittle bones, flames clawing toward the starless sky. Sparks rained down across the clearing, scattering into the mob like fireflies from hell. The men staggered, their torches briefly dim beside the inferno they had birthed. In front of that blaze, Jonathan Kersey stood, chest heaving, arms spread to block the Hollow children huddled behind him. Smoke smeared his face, his coat clung with sparks, but his stance did not break. Look, he shouted, voice raw, cracking through the roar. Do you see monsters? Do you see demons? These are children, pale, sick, like yours would be if shut away in darkness. This, he gestured toward the inferno. This is no cure. This is murder. The words cut into the mob like jagged stone, some men faltering under the truth of what their eyes already told them. Samuel trembled in Hannah's arms, coughing until blood flecked his lips. Ruth buried her face in her shawl, sobbing. They were not myth. They were frailty itself, struggling to breathe. Yet for every man swayed, another burned hotter with rage. Hatred too long nurtured in shadows does not surrender in one plea. They'll taint the rest, one miner roared, stepping forward. Look at 'em. Ghosts in flesh. You call that human? The curse don't get cured, another bellowed. Best to put it down at the root. Voices rose again, torches lifted higher. Fear and fury surge anew. Joseph, his eyes lit in fire's glow, seized the dropped axe and stepped beside Kersey. His pale face twisted with wrath not at the mob alone, but at the futility of years lived in hiding. You want blood? Joseph thundered. You'll have mine first. The axe gleamed as he raised it, his body thin, but his defiance raw and feral. For a moment, the mob leaned back, uncertain. Few men, even drunk with rage, wished to be the first to meet steel. Kersey's heart hammered. This was it, the moment where mountain justice tilted either to massacre or retreat. He knew blood spilled here, whether Joseph's or another's, would bind the rest to slaughter. He placed a hand on Joseph's arm, voice fierce but steady. Don't fight them with their own fire. Show them you're more than fear. Joseph's jaw trembled, teeth clenched, but his grip eased. The axe lowered slightly, sparks reflected in his watery eyes. In that hesitation lay a flicker of possibility. But possibility is fragile. A stone sailed sudden from a crowd, striking Ruth across the shoulder. She screamed, stumbling. Hannah bent to shield her, crying out. The mob surged forward as though a dam had broken. Torches thrust nearer, rifles raised, shouts deafening. Drive 'em out. Burn 'em all. Chaos slammed into the clearing. Kersey lunged, seizing Ruth and pulling her behind his coat as men swept closer. Joseph swung the axe once, not to kill, but to scatter, his arms shaking from lack of strength. Hannah clutched Samuel, so tight his cough strangled beneath her sobs. Then the gunshot. The sound silenced everything. Smoke curled upward. Men froze mid-step, torches raised but forgotten. At the edge of the mob stood Elias Turner. The farmer Kersey had spoken with weeks earlier. His rifle still smoked from the air shot he had fired into the sky. Enough, Elias growled. You see what you're doing? Children. His face hardened as he spat into the dirt. We may hate 'em. We may fear 'em. But I'll be damned before my hands burn babes alive. The crowd wavered. Torches lowered slightly, mutters fraying into unease. The fire of anger met the weight of conscience. But others hissed back. You'd spare 'em, Elias? After generations hidin'? You'll have their sickness breed yours. They ain't my kind, Elias admitted grimly. But they're still flesh, still breathin'. You burn 'em, you're worse than cursed. Kersey seized the moment. Listen to him, he roared, voice nearly gone. This is sickness, not sorcery. Proof lies here. He ripped open his satchel, holding up the vial of dark red blood for all to see. Science speaks. This blood carries their weakness. It is human, nothing more. Few in the mob understood disease enough to grasp. But the sight of blood itself, a reminder that the hollow clan bled as any man did, pierced deeper than words. Murmurs ran uneasy. Some stepped back. A younger man dropped his torch altogether. Yet not all hearts bent. One figure harsher, drunk with fire rather than fear, snarled. Proof be damned. He surged forward with torch raised. Joseph intercepted, axe swinging flat against the man's arm, knocking torch and fury to earth. Flames sputtered in dirt. The man cursed, retreating, clutching his wrist. That final act fractured the mob. Half faltered, shame creeping in. Half bristled, unwilling to yield. But mobs feed on momentum, and with division, momentum snapped. Whispering, swearing, they scattered back toward trees. Torches dimmed, voices lost. Within minutes, the clearing emptied to smoke, ember, and broken silence. The hollow clan still stood, their cabin gone to ash, their secret laid bare, but their lives intact, barely. Hannah collapsed to her knees, Ruth pressed tight against her chest. Samuel coughed till he fainted, his small body spent. Joseph dropped the axe, shoulders bent as if the weight of years fell upon him at once. And Kersey stood shaking, vial of blood still in hand, eyes burning with smoke and tears, realizing what had just been spared was not salvation, but postponement. The storm had broken, yes, but storms in Appalachia never truly ended. They only circled back in time. Behind them, the ashes of the hollow house smoldered, sparks drifting into night like prayers unanswered. Morning came not with birdsong, but with the hiss of embers cooling in the clearing. Smoke clung low to the ground, acrid and heavy, curling from the black skeleton of timbers that once formed the hollow clan's home. Where once walls stood, now only charcoal and ruin marked the earth. Jonathan Kersey woke stiff upon a patch of grass, having fallen into uneasy slumber only when exhaustion at last devoured dread. His clothes were streaked with ash. His throat ached with smoke inhaled. Around him, silence hung thick, not the silence of peace, but the fragile stillness after violence, when even the air fears to stir. Beside the ruin, Hannah crouched holding Samuel and Ruth close, her face gray with soot and grief. Samuel's cough rattled weak but constant, his thin body trembling with fever that had not been present before the fire. Ruth's eyes stared wide, as though still seeing flames play across night sky. Hannah rocked them, tears long dry but her arms fierce. Joseph stood apart, half shrouded in dawn mist, shoulders square though his frame sagged. He gripped the axe head down against the ground, his face unreadable, empty as a carved mask. Behind him, old Maria muttered scraps of prayer to embers, her voice hoarse with smoke, her gaze burning stubborn even as her home lay cinders. Kersey pushed to his feet, joints heavy with guilt. He had saved their lives, yes. But what lives now? No roof, no protection. Only enemies smoldering in the hills beyond. Their hatred not gone, merely postponed. "You can't stay here," Kersey said, voice low but firm. "The house is ash. Those men will return if anger stirs again. You must leave this hollow." Joseph turned, eyes blazing beneath pale brow. "Leave? This soil is ours. My father's bones lie here, his before him. You'd see us scattered like dogs. Your bloodline will end here if you remain," Kersey countered sharply. "Last night proved it. You cannot defend against many more fires. You cannot breathe smoke forever." Silence cracked between them, harsh as the snapping timber underfoot. Hannah's voice broke it, weary yet edged with resolve. "He's right, Joseph. Children will not live in ash. We cannot." Joseph's jaw worked, muscles taut. At last, he drove the axe into soil with one hard thrust and left it there, blade half buried in black earth. He said nothing, but the gesture ended argument. Kersey took a breath, steady but grim. "I will try to find shelter for you. There are church missions, perhaps families braver than the mob, willing to lend roof. But I warn you, prejudice runs deep here. They may refuse. They may turn you away. They always have," Hannah whispered bitterly. Still, before despair could root, Elias Turner, the same farmer who had fired his rifle skyward to break the mob, appeared from the ridge path. His face was carved with lines of fatigue, his clothes dirt-stained, but his eyes carried something unexpected. Shame. "I come to see who lived," he said flatly. He glanced at the ruins, then at Hannah cradling her children. His jaw shifted. "Didn't stop them in time. Should've. I slowed some, but not enough." Joseph glared, but spoke nothing. Hatred too heavy for words pressed his lips shut. Elias swallowed hard, then said the one thing none expected. "There's room in my barn. Not fit for folks, but drier than earth. Won't offer it long, but long enough to think your next step." The air stilled further. Even Kersey blinked, shocked that compassion, however meager, had crawled among cruelty. Hannah's weary gaze met Joseph's. His fists clenched, but after a long ache of silence, he gave a short nod. Without word, he lifted Samuel while Hannah carried Ruth, and together they followed Elias down the ridge. Old Maria muttered dissent but hobbled after. Kersey paused at the ruin before joining them. He knelt, taking one handful of ash. The memory of voices shouting burned them coursing through him. Ash fell through his fingers like time itself, proof that prejudice consumed faster than flame. He clenched what little remained into his palm and stood, following the family down to uncertain survival. Days in Elias's barn passed slow, weighted with suspicion. Samuel's cough worsened. Kersey tended him tirelessly with what scraps of medicine he carried, but improvement was thin. Ruth grew quiet, no longer playing with stones or humming to herself, but staring at dust beams cutting into straw. Hannah hovered near them constantly, exhaustion dragging her face. Joseph brooded near the door, hand on axe though no mob yet came. Old Mariah lingered like a shadow, muttering hymns and curses alike. Kersey split his time between tending the children and begging support in town. Some he approached turned him away outright. Others slammed doors. One minister promised prayer, but no shelter. A mission school in a neighboring valley agreed only to consider helping, but weeks would pass before any decision. Each refusal deepened Kersey's guilt. He could diagnose, record, explain, but he could not compel compassion. Science could not force open hearts sealed by fear. Elias, though stiff and conflicted, remained true to his offer. "Don't make me out no saint," he grumbled once. "I ain't their kin, don't want to be. But I'll not have more blood weigh on me come judgment." That was enough. Kersey nodded silently. In a county thick with feuds, even reluctant mercy was rare currency. On the fifth morning, Samuel woke weak, fever hot against Kersey's hand. His breath wheezed shallow, chest rising thin. Hannah's pleading eyes pierced the physician, wordless but desperate. Kersey did what he could. Fashioned compress from cold water, measured pulse again and again, murmured reassurance, though his heart carried dread. He knew what he was seeing, a child's constitution too fragile to withstand smoke, stress, exhaustion. This was the cost of Fire's night. The clan's fragility, their hereditary illness, had taken form in Samuel's failing lungs. Kersey fought, but medicine was threadbare here. Without hospitals, without supplies, without possibilities. As Samuel drifted into fitful rest, Kersey sat back, fingers trembling around his pen. In his ledger, he wrote not as scientist, but as man. Fear breeds fire. Fire breeds loss. If this boy dies, it will not be disease alone, but hatred that killed him. He tore the page, folded it into his coat. Proof, but also confession. Night fell heavy again, wind howling across barn walls. The hollow clan huddled near, Ash still clinging to their souls, though days had passed. In their silence lay a truth Kersey dreaded. They were not simply cursed by illness, but cursed by men. And dawn promised no cure for either. The barn smelled of hay and damp straw, yet beneath it lingered the sourness of sickness. Kersey knew the scent well. Years tending fevers and infections had etched it into memory. But here it pressed sharper, heavier. It was not just the odor of weakness in flesh, it was the reek of inevitability. Samuel's fever raged through his fragile frame. His chest rose shallow, each breath a battle fought and lost. Hannah held him, rocking gently, whispering words unseen in tears. Joseph sat rigid near the barn door, axe in lap, knuckles white. He stared outward, as though his will alone could deny the boy's decline. Old Mariah muttered hymns and curses in equal measure, railing at God for cruelty. Kersey worked tirelessly, cool cloth on brow, careful prayers of medicine applied in absence of true resources. Each pulse, each pattern of breath, he marked in his ledger. But science here was a drowned voice. No tonic bottled could thicken a child's blood-borne thin. No law of health could undo generations bred too close, years spent hidden from sunlight. At dawn, Samuel's eyes barely opened, glazed and unfocused. His lips parted, fighting for air. Hannah's cries grew low and broken. Joseph did not move, yet his shoulders trembled against the weight of defeat. Kersey leaned close, stethoscope pressed to the boy's fragile ribs. Faint, but steady enough until it wasn't. The beat stuttered, wavered, then slowed. And as daylight spilled through a crack in barn wall, the breath ceased. Samuel's chest fell silent. The boy was gone. Hannah's wail split the air, raw as torn cloth. Ruth clung desperately to her mother, sobbing without words she could form. Joseph's face held no tears, only stone, as if grief had petrified him on the spot. Mariah's muttering broke into screams, fists pounding straw. "Why take ours? Why punish us, Lord?" Kersey closed his own eyes, pressing fingers to temples as guilt surged through veins heavier than blood. He had sworn to heal, yet healing here had no handhold. His words of science could not shield the child against body, against hate, against circumstance. The weight crushed him. He left the barn after an hour, lantern burned to stub. Outside, morning broke quiet, mountains bruised with mist. Elias Turner waited nearby, arms folded, eyes grim. Without words, he understood. Death needs no messenger. "They won't forgive him now," Elias said at last. His voice was tired earth, cracked but steady. "Child in the ground won't soften hearts. Folk will say sickness is proven, that it's in their blood. You know it. I know it. Truth won't save M." Kersey hated him for speaking it, and hated himself more for knowing it was right. Fear had already burdened the Hollow clan enough to burn their home. Now proof of death would fuel that fear to fire again. There was no safe ground left in Breathitt County. Back inside, Hannah had lain Samuel on a strip of cloth, hands weaving trembling final prayers. Joseph dug in silence into the earth behind the barn, each strike of shovel breaking both ground and soul. By nightfall, they lowered Samuel's small frame wrapped in linen into soil. The girl Ruth clutched Kersey's hand so tight his knuckles whitened, her sobs muffled against a sleeve. The burial was simple. No hymn from neighbors, no reverend's blessing. Only dirt and silence under mountain sky. Afterward, Joseph stood, shovel embedded in earth, face blank, but voice low as stone shifting. "We are ended here. Ash and grave. No roof, no place. This county will cut us down." Kersey met his stare with fierce resolve. "Then you must go. Leave these mountains. There are other places, cities, hospitals, schools that will not burn your children. Leave before more graves are dug." But old Mariah snapped back, voice biting through grief. "Leave soil that holds our bones? Leave to wander like dogs cast out? Better to rot where we belong than breadcrumbs, unknown." Joseph's eyes flickered between his mother and Kersey, torn across generations. He spoke nothing further. That evening, Kersey set pen to paper again, his hand quaking with exhaustion. The Hollow clan suffer congenital illness, likely methemoglobinemia or blood weakness. Isolation worsened it. Prejudice perfected it. Their secrecy was survival, not damnation. Yet secrecy birthed fear, and fear birthed fire. Child Samuel deceased, July 1911. The record stands. The tragedy of superstition cost his life as much as bloodline did. He paused, pen hovering, then scrawled one more line with unfamiliar fury. If history forgets them, it commits the final murder. The days that followed were a blur. Elias offered what food he could, but word spread fast. Whispers of death in the Hollow carried venom enough to summon another mob. Lanterns glowed suspicious in valley windows. Voices muttered sharp at dusk. At last, one moonless night, Hannah came to Kersey with Ruth at her side. Joseph trailed after, burden heavy on his shoulders, Mariah hunched behind. Hannah spoke, tone stripped to fight. "We will go. Away from here. Wherever road takes." Her voice trembled, yet her eyes, no longer pleading, were fire set to embers. So Kersey gathered what little coin he could, what scraps of supply fit into sack. Elias lent mule and directions to roads threading toward Lexington. At dawn, they left. Quiet shapes moving down the ridge, no torches to follow, no neighbors to see. Joseph led with stubborn gait. Hannah carried Ruth half asleep, Mariah whispering curses toward hills that had betrayed them. Kersey watched them disappear, his chest carved with grief and guilt in equal measure. He had not saved them. He had only escorted them into harder exile. Would cities cure them? Would prejudice soften elsewhere? Or would they remain hunted shadows, wherever pale faces met suspicion? He could not know. All he knew was that Appalachia had chosen darkness over truth. One family, cursed not by God, but by blood and by men, dragged out of their hollow not by hands of help, but torch and shout. Years later, when Kersey's notes resurfaced, tucked inside state health archives, the Hollow Clan existed only as names faint in margins. No trace of where they went, no further census mark, no hint of survival or lineage. To history, they became smoke, whispers on the mountain, swallowed like so many feuds, and forgotten dead. But in Breathitt County, stories never truly vanish. Around firesides, children still grew quiet when elders muttered of pale folk who lived in shadow. Some swore to hear their cough in foggy nights. Others claimed their eyes still glimmer in forests past dusk. And Jonathan Kersey, when at last his hands, aged too frail to write, remembered that night of fire until the day he died. He remembered Samuel's stillness. He remembered Ruth's grip. Above all, he remembered the sound of a mob chanting curses in flames against the frail and powerless. The real curse, he knew, had not been born in blood. The real curse had been men's refusal to see humanity in faces different from their own. A curse still roaming the mountains, still echoing long after the Hollow Clan faded into ash and silence. And so the story endured. Not in ledgers, not in headlines, but in whispers. Whispers in the hollows.
Have you noticed how every family hides secrets that seem to whisper from the past? Here, we uncover buried stories, family curses, and mysteries many would rather silence. But if you've made it this far, it means you feel that same chilling curiosity that holds you captive. Don't let these voices fade away. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow each new case we bring every week. Join a community that isn't afraid to face the darkest side of history. Get ready, the next secrets are already waiting to be told.